The BS Report is a free-flowing conversation that occasionally touches on mature subjects.
First of all,
this is the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
It might be cool, I don't know. And if it's not, I don't care.
The BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Bill Simmons works for ESPN. He's also named the Sports Guy, and he writes a comical sports column. He must be a popular dude.
The BS Report.
It's got a real dirty sound, like a rusty steak knife cutting through a well-aged steak.
Now.
Here's Bill Simmons.
Welcome to the BS Report. A sunny day here in Southern California. I have new headphones. Hopefully I sound a tiny bit better. This is a two-part podcast. Part two is going to be with Henry Abbott from ESPN.com. We're going to talk draft, lockout, all kinds of stuff. This is part one, as you know, on the Subway Fresh Take Hotline right now. The general manager of the Minnesota Timberwolves, Mr. David Kahn. What's happening?
Not much, Bill. How are you?
Thank you for coming on. I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you having me on after all these years.
It's only been 2 years. I don't feel like it feels like longer than that.
For me, it feels like more than 2 years. Trust me, Bill.
Well, yeah, I mean, I got to be honest. I've written some unkind things about your performance over the last 2 years. And, you know, last night you traded Jonny Flynn, a guy you picked sixth in the draft 2 years ago, for, I guess, basically the 23rd pick, and then you traded that. You moved out of the first round. You didn't even get a first rounder back for Jonny Flynn, except for a future first rounder you're getting later. Did you feel like you sold a little too early on this guy?
Part of me, yes. Part of me, no. I think Johnny's going to be a very fine player in our league, and I have a lot of faith and confidence in him. But you have to sometimes just, deal with reality. And the reality is that Johnny got hurt last year, and that was the biggest part of his season last year being so difficult. And the other part is, and I think we all have to take responsibility for that, we didn't exactly feature Johnny here in a style of play that was conducive to him. Right. And I feel very badly about that as well. But the fact remains is that, we have Ricky Rubio here for next season. We have Luke Rittenauer. We have point guards. And it just wasn't going to be a situation here where I felt Johnny could play significant minutes and increase his trade value, especially in what would maybe be a very short season next year, depending on what happens next week. So rather than continue to hold, I thought actually we did okay. We got a future first, the Memphis first in 2013. As you mentioned, we just moved back 3 picks in the first round. We also got the 38th pick, which we optimized later. And we got Brad Miller, who I think could actually help us a little bit, in the locker room especially. But when I was with the Pacers, he was on our team then. And he's just a solid guy, a solid veteran, and I'm looking forward to having him on our team.
But you must have had a lot of general managers sniffing around for Flynn because, as you said, that was a guy who was in a bad situation. He's playing in the triangle, which chews up every point guard. And, if I was a GM, I would have been sniffing around because I think Flynn's somebody that could be salvaged. We've seen young point guards struggle for a couple of years and then come out of their shell later. Are you worried about him coming back to haunt you?
Not coming back to haunt me, but I think the point you make is dead on. In fact, I expect Jonny Flynn to be a very good point guard in this league. I even think it's not out of the realm to think someday he'll be one of the very best point guards in our league. But at some point, you just have to make a decision. Is there going to be an opportunity here for him to increase his value, and how much tension does it cause to have him on the team still with Ricky and Luke, and what kind of minutes then will everybody have to sacrifice? And I just feel sometimes you just have to cut loose, as much as it might be painful, to your point.
All right, so what do you say to the Minnesota fans who look back at that 2009 draft and are still confused by the fact that you still took 2 point guards back-to-back and that you passed on Stephen Curry?
Well, I appreciate the time. Yeah, this could take an hour. But here's what everybody needs to know. I took the job on May 22nd, and one of the things I was told by my employers meaning Glenn Taylor and the Timberwolves, was that the basketball staff historically here had been ignored in terms of player and talent evaluation, and that typically, the decision maker would pick somebody without much, rigor applied to the test. And I don't mean to be, difficult about anybody. So that's why I'm not using names, lest he who is without sin cast the first stone. That's kind of my mantra,
right.
Not only these days, but for a long time. We didn't have a point guard on the roster. I traded Randy Foye, who I didn't think was a point guard, and Mike Miller, who really didn't want to be here to get the 5th pick. I felt it was
that was
important.
a good trade. I'll defend that trade.
Well, no, but I needed to because there was no future for them here, and we needed to rebuild. And when Ricky fell to us at the 5th pick, I just felt for the future of our franchise. He was only 18 years old, but I saw the kind of charisma and appeal in the game most of all. I wanted him to be on our team, especially since I'd already identified we need to be an up-tempo team here. We're Minnesota, and as much as I talk about the weather not being a factor, we've got to change the culture here. We've got to have a style of play that not only the fans want to watch, but the players want to play. I've yet to meet a player who says, God, I wish we could play another grinded-out half-court 82-81 game tonight. Players want to run. And so once we took Rubio, we knew for a fact that unless he was taken in the top 2 picks that year, he could not come for at least a year, maybe 2, because of the buyout. So we knew we had no point guard on the roster. And if you recall, in that free agent class, we had as the number 1 point guard Ramon Sessions. And I was very worried that Ramon was going to cost a lot of money because several teams, to use your word, were sniffing around Ramon already. Also, we didn't have any tradable assets. Al Jefferson was coming off an ACL. Corey Brewer was coming off an ACL. Kevin, I didn't want to trade. He was just coming off his first year. We had a very, very thin team. So I just felt very strongly that night, Bill, that we had to come out of the first round with a point guard, somebody who could actually play significant minutes for us, and ideally, somebody we liked. We love Jonny Flynn. And I love Jonny Flynn. I want to be very clear about that, and it's my pick. I own it. I'm accountable for it. Our staff loved Jonny Flynn. We had him over Rubio on the board. I especially liked his leadership capabilities. Jonny has a lot of that. It's like pouring out of him. But one of the things I think we suppressed that first year were those very same leadership capabilities because we made him play a style of play that really wasn't conducive to him, and it made him feel very insecure about who he was as a player.
Well, can I interrupt you for a second?
Sure, of course.
You said you wanted to play an up-tempo style, and you were excited to do that, et cetera, et cetera. Then why did you install the triangle offense?
Well, I didn't, and I don't think that I think the triangle, let's come back to that in a moment, if I may. Let's just finish this thing, and then I will address that.
Thank you.
I think that I missed the fact that Stephen Curry could be converted into a point guard. I was very concerned about Stephen maybe being more a combo guard. I like a Randy Foye, but a different type of player, of course, as opposed to a pure point. And we liked Jonny. We had him over Curry on our board, and so I felt that at 6 we had to have a point guard. I couldn't be sure at 18, which we owned that year, that a point guard would still be left when you looked at all the teams in the draft that needed a point guard. As it turned out, Lawson was there, but we had already taken Flynn, and we had Flynn higher on our board. I think that, and if you recall, we moved the Lawson pick. We moved it to Denver, and that pick a year later became the Martell Webster pick, and I expect Martell to have a really big year for us next year. This year was tough because he had a herniated disc, not once, and then he had another back condition. When I interviewed Kurt, we were very clear that we were going to be up-tempo, and he agreed with that. It's the way he wanted to play, early 80s style Lakers that he played with. He told me very candidly that he thought the triangle, though, was a good offense from time to time to flow into. I'm a big believer in ball and player movement. I grew up watching the 77 Trailblazers, and that was Jack Ramsey's style. I love the early 80s Lakers. I love the Sacramento teams that Rick Adelman coached. I like when the ball moves. I like when you have passers on the court. It's just more beautiful to watch. So I was on board, but I think and I hope this doesn't come across too critical, we should have adjusted more to fit Jonny's style as well. We should have been able to have our cake and eat it too, and also install some things that played to Jonny's capabilities to push the ball and to get into some pick-and-roll situations. And I think Kurt erred maybe too much on the side of trying to teach Jonny how to be the perfect point guard without giving him some opportunities along the way to have some success.
Right.
So I hope in answering that very lengthy way, we address both those things.
Okay, so, it doesn't seem like you and Kurt over these last 2 years that you guys are really on the same page with a lot of this stuff, and that led to, I don't even know if it's official yet, but I think you're letting him go this week, right? Or can you not say
No, in fact, I was talking to his agents this morning, and we're still having discussions. I feel, first of all, very badly because Kurt Rambis is a great guy, and I mean that sincerely, and a really great family man. He's got a beautiful family. He's a smart basketball man. I think both he and I, maybe at times, as much as I told him over and over how difficult this would be, when you inherit what we inherited roster-wise, and you're trying to rebuild, and really the first year was almost excavation more than rebuild, this is painful, and it's hard. And I think that what we've probably seen is maybe both of us underestimated how hard this would be. And so I wouldn't say that it's not we're on the same page. I do know this year Kurt felt, for whatever reason, the weight of expectations, whereas I felt very strongly nobody expected us to make the playoffs last year. In fact, I didn't think we had a prayer of making the playoffs last year with such a young team and so much turnover. But I think that Kurt felt that, and he and I talked very candidly about that as recently as last Friday. And I feel badly. I mean, I just feel badly about, when being a head coach in our league on a losing team has got to be one of the most awful jobs in the world. Because especially in today's hypercritical world, hyper-judgmental world, and the kind of information flow that comes, it's just a never-ending assault. And I just have a very healthy respect for the head coaches in our league. It's tough. You're naked. You're vulnerable. It's just awful some days.
But at the same time, right at the end of the season, you were the one who said you were disappointed. You thought the team would play better and do better than it did. So didn't you feed into some of those expectations a little bit?
No, after the fact, what I was narrowly focusing on is I really feel with a young team, Bill, it should improve during the year no matter what the talent. Because young guys should, by definition, get better. You can even make an argument, I think, that a young team maybe should show more improvement from day one to the last day of the season than a veteran team. And we had gone through 2 successive seasons, Bill, where we frankly just kind of stopped 2/3 of the way of the season. Yeah. And we not only didn't get better, but we flatlined, and we ended 2 years in a row with really long losing streaks, and that's tough. So I think the issue for me was to understand the underlying causes of, well, why did the team 2 years ago fail to improve as a team? Because in Kurt's defense, we had some players last year that he did a marvelous job with in terms of making them better players and more productive players. Kevin Love, who we worked with really hard the previous summer one-on-one. Michael Beasley had a great year for us until he turned his ankle. Second half of the year wasn't great, but you could see the promise in the first half of the season. Darko Milicic, for whatever anybody thinks of Darko, he is still, especially defensively, in a league that doesn't have many centers, somebody that's good to have on the team as long as you're using him in the right role. So I thought Kurt did a great job last year individually. I thought the team performance in the final third of the season was what was disturbing.
And, you got to take some of the blame for that, though, because it was a team that seemed redundant in a lot of areas. Like you had Beasley and you had Anthony Randolph. You had, the point guard situation wasn't very good. Wes Johnson, I don't think totally gave you everything you were looking for, or did he? Were you happy with how Wes Johnson played?
To some extent, but let me address the first part. I take total responsibility. That's my job. I take total responsibility. I'm totally accountable for everything that occurs here. It's on my watch. It's on me, and nobody should think anything but that. In fact, the decision to hire Kurt is on me. I made that recommendation to our owner. As for Wes, I think Wes has a tremendous upside. I like the way that Beasley plays small forward, and no, I don't think there's a duplication with Randolph. I think what we're doing, and last night might have even embellished this somewhat, we're really collecting basketball players, but they're versatile, and I do think there will be a challenge because we have a lot of guys who are basketball players, and they may not fit in that compartmentalized world of is he a 3, is he a 4, is he a 5. But I like the talent we've assembled. It's young talent. It needs to grow, and we will continue to need to seek patience. But I do believe that this team is at least positioned now, the way we've compiled it, to show some sort of steady incline over the next several years.
So it seems to me like you're collecting all these assets, which I think is a relatively smart thing to do if you're a small market team, because it's something the Celtics did in 2007. They collected assets. They were able to parlay them into Kevin Garnett and Ray Allen. The thing I don't understand with you is that it seemed like you were disappointed in how last year's team played, but yet they were assets that didn't totally make sense when you put them together. You were redundant in some spots. Do you feel like these assets that you have can be combined into a team that actually wins games?
Well, I do, and before we go too much further, I think that there's a natural tension between assets and having a team that can play that makes sense, and I think we referenced that with the Jonny Flynn decision that we made in the draft in 2009. But to your question, yes, I'm very excited about the idea of Kevin, Randolph at the 5, Kevin, Derek Williams at the 4 from time to time, Beasley, Wes Johnson, and Ricky, bringing the ball up the court, and these guys flying down the court together. I think it will pose challenges for other teams, and I acknowledge it's going to pose challenges for us on certain nights. There are certain teams that with their length, maybe Memphis, where we'll have to play, maybe Milicic and Randolph more minutes on those nights. Other nights we probably can get away playing small, but I think that the lineup that we're creating has enough versatility and flexibility in it that we can pretty much play against anybody, provided we're willing to change the players from time to time in terms of their minutes.
Well, I do like Anthony Randolph, and you've taken a few guys that I've liked, because I liked the 2009 draft. I loved Rubio, too. My fear with Rubio, and I wrote this, this is not the same guy you drafted. His last 2 years were not really on par with, I think, what people are expecting. I thought this guy was going to be potentially a transcendent player, and he could barely get off the bench on his EuroLeague team. Are you worried about this guy being a bust?
Well, let's be careful with the facts, Bill.
Okay.
If Ricky started every single game of his last 2 years with Barcelona, except the last 9 when he had a twisted ankle, right. And I think the coach just wanted to go with a hot lineup. He was a fabulous player for Barcelona in the EuroLeague Final Four a couple years ago in front of a lot of NBA scouts. I think that, as I said to Jonny Flynn once, and you'll probably remember this cultural reference. Remember when we grew up, Bill, and they had that cartoon, those wacky car races? And there was Penelope Pit Stop, and I can't remember all the names, but it was always crazy, one car to be really in front, or it's actually like a dot race, on the big screen. You can never tell who's ahead. Well, that's really how it is for young NBA players, and especially I would say young NBA point guards. Everybody always wants to judge people day by day in today's society, or at worst week by week. I don't think at age 20 Ricky has even scratched the surface of his potential. I think he's going to have a really fine career. But if everybody gets focused on how he played in February of 10 or December of 09 and try to extrapolate, well, that's how it's going to be, I think history has proven us all wrong. There's countless examples, Chauncey Billups being one of them, of guys who had really, up and down careers at best the first few years, only to become some of the best players in our league. The most important quality I think you can have, at least in my seat, is patience. You just can't get impatient with young players too quickly. It does take time, and you just have to be willing to wait.
My counter to that would be you traded Jonny Flynn after 2 years, though.
I agree
so you're
with
saying
you
did that
in other
because...
words, you and I aren't in disagreement, but I also said, just again to remind, unless you can see a path to rebuilding trade value, unless you see a situation where a player can be given significant minutes in your organization to repair that, it probably won't happen. In fact, it might get worse. And with Rubio and Ridnour on the team right now, I just don't see a path with us to rebuild trade value. Secondly, Johnny's had a tough couple of years here, especially because of the second year with the injury. At some point, if we're going to be a place where players want to come to, we also have to be a place where we look at a player in the eyes and say, you know what, it may not work here. We're going to try to help you and get you to somewhere where you can have a career. I think that you have to be willing to do that. Donnie Walsh taught me that in Indiana, and I think that's really sound advice.
Well, I have to ask this question then. I mean, the other path you could have gone was you could have just kept Jonny Flynn, and you could have traded the rights to Rubio. Did you think about doing that, and did you get any killer offers for him that, you really hesitated? We got, through the years, some incredible offers for Ricky, including even the night we drafted him. He remains probably to this day, along with Kevin, our most marketable person. But as the team evolved the last 2 years, and especially with the style of play I want this team to play,
he could really be a huge part of it. He could be, Bill, and you've seen the highlights. This guy's very entertaining and not in a frill way. In other words, he doesn't do the fancy for the sake of fancy. It just kind of comes out of him naturally. At least that's what I saw when I scouted him before I took this job. And the second thing is, as we've added pieces of this team, Michael Beasley, Kevin Love, Wes Johnson, Martell Webster, Anthony Randolph, these guys like to shoot. They all want to score. They all want the ball in their hands.
Right.
Probably at this point, having a guard who maybe to a fault passes or overpasses probably is a very healthy thing to have on our team.
Well, do you feel like your job future is a little bit at stake with how he plays this next year? Because if he comes out and he's not good, that's probably going to be the final nail in the coffin for you.
Well, but that's you saying that, and that's how the world works. I have to worry about really only one man, Glenn Taylor. And I think I have a good relationship with him. And I think that it's up to him in terms of, whether I'm here 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. I will tell you this, I love working for the man. He is the most gentle, kind man I think I've ever encountered in this business at that ownership level. And I think that we need to prepare ourselves that there will be some bumps in the road for Ricky Rubio. He's 20. I mean, that was the thing that was so kind of humorous at times. When we drafted him, he was 18. And it was like, oh, my God, he's staying at Spain. His whole life is going to end. He's 20. Yeah. And we need to also prepare ourselves that most 20-year-old point guards in our league, there are very few of them to begin with, do struggle a little bit. We're invested in Ricky. He's on a rookie-scale contract. He's going to be here for a long time. And I think that he will be a very fine player in our league, but we should be prepared. It's not going to be easy like it would be for anybody.
Can you explain to me what happened this week with the whole Kurt Rambis thing? Like, for instance, Van Gundy killed you guys last night during the draft. He thought, Rambis was basically being dragged through the mud, and instead of just doing the dignified thing and just saying, you know what, we're going to call it quits. And then Adrian Wojnarowski today wrote that, you guys were basically trading back in the draft to pick up extra money so that you could pay for Kurt Rambis' buyout. Did you think that was a fair comment?
No, because it's not based on fact. But that's what the world we live in. When I was a journalist many, many, many years ago, you went to both sources and confirmed or denied. That day ended a long time ago. I'll give you a story. I'm on the job for about 2 weeks in 2009. And, I think Steve Kerr won't mind me telling the story. Steve Kerr calls. It's a Sunday. I've been here for about 2 weeks. And we do the usual chit-chat that you do on the phone, and he says to me kind of out of the blue about 10 minutes in the call, hey, would you trade Al Jefferson for Amari Stoudemire? Now, remember, Al's coming off his ACL, and Amari's coming off his eye injury. And at the time, Amari's reputation, maybe league-wide, wasn't as sterling as it is today because it is sterling. And I thought about it. I said, Steve, I don't think it's probably the right time for either player. And I just met with Al here to tell him that I really wanted to see if we could turn this around here. So I certainly didn't feel comfortable trading Al at that point. 2 days later, Bill, I'm sitting in my office, and I've got ESPN News on, and there's a crawl. ESPN reports, or maybe it was KTAR TV reports Arizona, Timberwolves offer Al Jefferson and number 6 pick to Suns for Amari Stoudemire. Suns turn it down. Nobody ever called to say if that was true or not. And 15, 20 years ago, that was a must. I immediately get a panic-stricken call from Jeff Schwartz, the agent for Al. Al's broken up and can't believe that I would have misrepresented what we were going to do. It was just awful. Yeah. And, you have to do damage control. But in today's world, nobody really waits for the facts. And I don't mean to pontificate or come across like this is some, so-called bully pulpit, but that's just the facts. Last night, the idea of us having to do deals, for a coaching buyout is so preposterous it doesn't almost deserve to be dignified with response. Our league historically has always highly valued early second-round picks. And if you move them, my advice would be, or what we try to do, is get a future second and some cash. That's what everybody does. And so I didn't mean to digress with the story, but I think that story I just told sort of says a lot about where our league is. It's a league of rumors, innuendo. It's a league of it's not a very healthy place time to time. And as I shared, it's upsetting most of all, I think, for the players who have to see their names associated with this trade and that trade on a daily basis. I've probably had 50 trade calls or discussions over the last 2 weeks, maybe 50.
Yeah.
None of them I felt rose to the level of a deal that would get done. And some of them were only like, would you do this? And would you do... That's how it usually goes. And you say, no, that's not a trade discussion. That's not a trade call. That's not an offer. You're just kind of feeling each other out. That's how the job is done. And yet it's now been elevated like the moment you whisper a name, well, you're trying to trade him. Well, no, that's not it at all. So it can be very uncomfortable some days. And so last night's comments, which aren't based on the facts, they're uncomfortable for everybody. But there's nothing really I can do about it, unfortunately.
Yeah, but, I mean, the last 6 weeks, people have everybody has thought that, Rambis was not going to be the coach anymore. I don't understand why this has taken so long. Is there some sort of legal issue that you can't discuss, or? Not
at all. In fact, let me try to help you a little bit. I felt very strongly at the end of the season, especially the way it ended, if Kurt and I had tried to have a productive discussion about where do we go from here, I don't think it would have ended very well. It's just too raw at the end of the season.
Yeah.
And I encouraged him strongly to go home, decompress, and relax, because we needed to talk about changing things, among other things. I waited to hear from him, and I didn't hear. And I think his agent kind of jumped in. And I'll take again the responsibility. Maybe it took a couple weeks more than it should have. But it emanated on, I remember he was here for some workouts on May 24th. And I said to him, Kurt, I really think we've got to change a lot of things about the way the team is being coached. And I really encouraged him to put those in writing because I think it would have forced him. In other words, Bill, I didn't want to be the one dictating the change or telling him how it had to be. That's not healthy. It really needed to flow out of him. And so the next week when he said he didn't know the process, that was kind of unfair because he did. He knew that he had been promised a meeting, and a lengthy meeting or a series of meetings to discuss where we go from here. And those meetings occurred just last Thursday and Friday, literally a week ago. We met for over 6 hours over a 2-day period, and I thought they were very positive and productive. And so this week, we've been a little bit in the holding pattern because of the draft. Because, Bill, I think one of the things that's clear is that Kurt is more comfortable coaching a team that has more veterans on it. Who isn't, right?
Yep.
It's hard work to coach a young team. And one of the issues that I think we had to wait for is to see how the team would look after last night. Because there were some scenarios or chances that never really became fully fledged. We were trying very hard to make the team a little bit older last night. It's not healthy to be this young. But sometimes you can't do what you want to do. The NBA is not a grocery store. I can't go down the aisle and just pick up a product off the shelf and put it on our team. And especially with this next agreement still to come, I sense that the league is in a very, very frozen place. People are very unsure how the new rules are going to be. And I thought it froze activity yesterday. That's why you only saw really one deal where you just saw some contracts change hands.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I certainly expected you to make a trade. I thought you were going to get, all the usual suspects, all the names that were out there. I'm sure you know this, but you do have a reputation, the Timberwolves, for if teams talk to you, somehow that leaks out into an online column or a reporter's column or even like Twitter or whatever. And, from what I hear, there's a feeling that if people talk seriously with you about a trade, it's going to come out somehow. Do you think that's fair?
Well, I read that comment, I think, a couple of days ago, and to the extent it's true, then it's something that's on my watch and will have to be addressed. But I think that if you were to take your finger and go down the entire list of teams, and I don't want to use the names, but you can do it afterwards. You can probably get a name out of every team that's been out there the last couple of weeks, not always associated with us.
Yeah.
In other words, it's probably very unfortunate that Tony Parker's name was out with San Antonio. And, we had no discussions with San Antonio in that respect. But again, the last thing I want to say is, events is that we're not accountable for our actions. We are. And I'm totally responsible for everything that happens here. And to the extent if we do have a problem that needs to be corrected, it will be corrected.
Yeah. So what do you have to do going forward? I mean, it seems like you have most of the players that you like. It seems like you're going to get a new coach.
I wouldn't go that far. I would not go that far today. But here's what I'll tell you about our team. I think we still need to get older. And I was even hesitant. We loved Malcolm Lee in the draft, and I was really torn whether we should take him because we really can't afford to have this many rookies and young players. But our scouts had him ranked much higher than when we selected him, and I thought it was the right thing to do at the time last night. We've got to sprinkle in some additional veterans along with Brad Miller. We've got to figure out intelligently how to make the roster a little bit more, it fits a little bit better. And I think we'll have some opportunities coming out of the next labor agreement. Our cap number is still likely to be well under the cap, and it should give us a lot of flexibility going forward to continue improving the team so that we can start taking the kind of steps necessary next season to make this what I think it can be. And I think in a couple years, we might be pretty good. We just might, but it's going to take a lot of work.
You know, you said you were a former sports writer before, so you kind of get the game, it seems like, of, you know, some people, if they're going to make a couple mistakes, they're going to go into the maelstrom and take some of the hits and the jokes and all that stuff. It seems like you're okay with it.
Totally, because that's part of what I have to do. And I think especially when times are bad or tough or you're not achieving, I need to be out front. It's my job to take as much of this, you know, the proverbial slings and arrows, because I need to protect our coaching staff and players, and especially our owner, because it's not fair for them. And you know, in today's world, you just have to have a thick skin, or you shouldn't be doing what we're doing. And you need to stop reading so much, and I don't read much of this anymore. But it is, as you know, Bill, a sort of negative type of culture right now in that respect. I mean, It's really kind of tough from time to time. So if you're going to do this, you just got to say that's the way it is. You can't complain about it. You go on and do it. And I'm not afraid to take risks. And sometimes risks don't work out, and sometimes they do. But I've always felt as long as they're calculated and you know what the upside and the downside are, you cannot be afraid to do this job.
So does that mean you enjoyed or you did not enjoy my Kahn joke from Star Trek 2?
Well, first of all, aren't you supposed to get in a car and drive somewhere?
What do you mean?
I thought you wrote one day that if Rubio came, now I don't pretend to have a column in front of me, but aren't you supposed to get in the car and drive right now?
Here's what happened. I wrote, I think in a mailbag, that I was convinced that Rubio wasn't coming, and I was like, I almost want to bet that if Rubio does end up coming, I will drive from LA to Minnesota for the first game. But then I made the point that if it, I wasn't getting anything if it didn't happen. It wasn't like an official bet, and it would have been weird for us to make that bet. But I was pretty certain that he was never coming over, at least to play for Minnesota. So congratulations on that, because I just did not think that was going to happen.
We have a lot of players who now are thrilled to be here. Beasley came from Miami. He's thrilled to be here. Randolph came from New York and Golden State. He's thrilled to be here. Darko came from New York. He's thrilled to be here. And now you're going to hear later today, this kid Derek Williams was hoping against all hope that we'd be there at 2. So we're trying to rebuild a culture here. We're trying to make this a place, against all odds perhaps, but I think we're doing it, where people want to be here, including Ricky Rubio of all people. He's thrilled to be here, and he's made comments to that effect all week long.
Did you seriously consider moving Kevin Love, because he's going to be a free agent? I think he's a restricted one this year. Is he restricted this year? But he's definitely a free agent.
No, he's in the
years.
class. If we have a similar labor agreement, whenever we come out of the labor agreement, we'll be able to extend him. And no, there has never been a moment while I've been here, and this is the truth, even though it's been insinuated otherwise, where we would trade Kevin. I think Kevin on a running team has a gift that few people have ever had. He throws an outlet pass like nobody's ever seen, maybe since Wes Unseld. And he's a smart, heady player. And the way he's developed his three-point shooting, you can't think of a better trail big and the things you can do in drag, pick, and roll with him. He's here for a long time, and he's never, ever, I swear on my son's life, he's never been discussed in a trade that we would do.
It wouldn't make sense for you to trade him, because he's one of the best 15 to 16 trade assets in the entire league.
Well, and I agree. The problem that we had to confront, though, Bill, he was never going to reach his potential with Al here. They play the same position. They're both not incredibly gifted athletically. They were, as George Karl said last year, sometimes bumping into one another. It just wouldn't have worked here. We had to make a choice. Right. And I think that's part of the reason why we made the Al trade last summer. There were other reasons as well. It provided us an enormous amount of financial flexibility for all the things we've been doing since then, like Anthony Randolph, Beasley, you name it. But I'm really excited about who Kevin is now, and I think Kevin can still get a lot better.
Last question. Do you think small market basketball can work anymore in this decade with the way that revenue has gone, with the way ticket sales have gone, with the way the economy has gone, with the way that people would rather stay home and watch TV other than sit in the upper deck? Do you feel like in 10 years there will be basketball in Minnesota?
Well, let me say this, because who knows if Commissioner Stern's listening in, and I need to be very careful in saying this first. I cannot speak about the lockout, so right. I don't want any of my comments to be reflective of that or the labor agreement. I think what I would say to your question is there is case studies, San Antonio, Utah, Sacramento when it was going good with the team I described earlier in this podcast, where you can have success and maybe even sustainable success as a small market team, and I believe that. But I believe that we have a much less room for error because we don't have the revenues that the Chicagos and the New Yorks and the LAs have, which means that we can't paper over our mistakes by dumping a player, paying him off. It's just harder to do. And so I don't feel at all like it's impossible or even challenged, but I acknowledge that it's tougher to do here in a market like Minnesota than it would be, say, in New York. And I've talked to Donnie, who I worked with in New York for almost 8 years. He acknowledged to me, David, you have no idea how easy it is to do this in New York. Well, our revenues are this and that, and I said, yep. Great, thanks for telling me, Donnie. That helps me.
Right. I mean, and it seems like you realize this. If you're a small market team, you have to bottom out.
Well, there's no way to be in between.
Way.
The worst thing to be in our league is mediocre and always fighting for that last playoff spot or just missing, because you never then can get high enough in the lottery to get players. Having said that, Bill, we still haven't been very lucky. We didn't get 2 in a year where it was Odin and Durant, and we've never gotten 1 in a year that it was Howard or Duncan or Robinson. Yeah. It ain't bad to be lucky, and especially lucky in the right year. So you just have to keep working at it and thinking about it and doing it. And as I said, I think you do have to take calculated risks.
Right. Well, you're a good sport. I appreciate that you came on.
Why?
I liked your pick last night. I know, but I've been hard on you over the years. I got to say.
Bill, you've been hard on like 90% of the sports community over the last several years. What makes me any different, right?
I call it like I see it.
What?
I call it like I see it.
Well, but my point is, it doesn't seem that you have a small cadre of people that you're hard on. You have a large group of people. So I find strength in numbers.
That's a nice way to put it. I'd like to think that I'm pretty fair. I mean, even in your case, I don't think you did a good job in your first year. I think you actually did a good job in your second year for the most part. You picked up Beasley.
Well, I think we did as well as we could.
Randolph.
And remember, I'm not using this as defense, but when you take a job on May 22nd, for a draft that's June, whatever it was, and you haven't been scouting that year, and you walk into a new organization, it presents its share of challenges. But I never would want somebody to think that I'm distancing myself from anything that we've done, because the moment you're there on day one, you own it, and it's yours.
All right. David Kahn, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Bill, thanks for having me. I look forward to doing this again.
All right, that's the end of part 1. Stay tuned for part 2. Henry Abbott from ESPN.com talking draft and lockout. That's part 2, available on iTunes or Pod Center, ESPN.com.
Target to sign off. Whoa!
Thank you for downloading the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Too much fun.
Check out more podcasts at the iTunes Music Store or at Pod Center at ESPNRadio.com.
Peace out.